Okay, we are live, episode 5. Dream actually told me he wanted to start with a little ramble about his team. He said it would either be a good discussion or a bad discussion. I think you can guess it's probably going to be a bad discussion. Dream, you was in attendance of the game last
I
night,
was.
game 6. Just what's the emotions for you right now?
Um, Depression, anger, and just outright feel like I just wasted money. That's those are the things that happen, Mars. And regardless of all the X's and O's, and I'm hearing a bunch of Heat fans complain about certain calls. I'm hearing people complain about them giving 9 seconds to Boston at the end. But at the end of the day, Mars, as we all know, it's a make or miss league, and it's about your best players. And I'm sorry if your two best players is 7 for 36 from the dang field. I'm sorry, you deserve to lose the game. You just deserve to gosh damn lose the game. And I'm wearing this hat because I want to make this proclamation right now. Once Monday happens and once the Heat do lose by 30 plus, I am renouncing my Heat fandom. I will no longer be a Heat fan. I'm telling you this right now, Mars. I'm done being a Heat fan. It is
Damn,
done. It is done. I will be a player fan from now on.
that's the final stage of grief right there when you disown your team.
Yes, I'm disowning this team because I will not be endorsing, pushing agendas for a team that will blow a 3-0 lead. It is inevitable. And I do blame Dub as well for propping up this team for
Shout out to Dub for saying Miami were going to win the series after game 1. Shout out to Dub.
this Dub jinxed us, bro. It's terrible.
I mean, it happens. It happens to the best of us. I mean, some
A
teams will...
3-0 does not just happen.
It happens. I mean,
No, it doesn't.
it does happen.
How does that-
It's happened a few times. 03, Dallas versus Portland. They were up 3-0. Portland came back to tie it, and then Dallas won in game 7. That's one time it's happened. I believe this is off the top of my head, so someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe Denver in 94, the year that they also were the 8 seed that beat the 1 seed in the first round. That year they went down 3-0 in the next round against the Jazz, I believe, and tied that series and then lost in game 7. And then there's probably another time that I can't remember, but those two times, that
The
shows
only
the...
difference with this fourth time is that the Celtics are actually going to be at home because I saw that somebody was talking about it. The Celtics are at home, so again, just another difference between those three other teams that were able to do it. The Celtics are going to be at home. They, my goodness, they have the momentum. Just won 3 straight games. Destroyed Miami in the second half of game 4. Destroyed them the entire game 5. And then this game, last game that we watched, it was weird because they'd go up 10, 11 points. The Heat would cut it to like 4 or 5. They'd go back up 10, 11. And then the last one in the fourth quarter when they were up like 11, 10 points, I thought the game was over. And then the Heat got right back into it. They just played with my heart, Mars. They played with my heart. They played with my passion. They made me believe, Mars, because I knew we are going to get swept by Denver anyways. I just don't want to be the team that blows a 3-0 lead. That's all I wanted. But of course.
Oh, so you... Okay, we might do a finals preview show. We might do that. We'll see what's going on. Wow, Jay Hartman with the $50 super chat. Shout out to Jay Hartman. You are going down in Mars Talk Sports history right now as the biggest super chat. Good to see the real Mars Talk ball. None of the narrative Mars on PC. Keep the videos coming, man. We appreciate you, Jay Hartman. This is the real Hoop Talk over here, the real Hoop Talk podcast. As you can see by the title, this is the second part of the top 20 greatest players of the post 3-point line era. I want to give you guys a rundown of what we did last week. We went from 20 to 12. So for anyone who did miss last week's show or hasn't had the opportunity to watch it, I want to just give you guys a little rundown of what happened last week. We went with Dreams 20 to 12 was, correct me if I'm wrong, Dream. I don't want to misquote you.
Okay, yeah.
Give me some... Let me start with my 20 to 12 first. That probably makes more sense. Let me start with my 20 to 12 first. I had Scottie Pippen at number 20. I had James Harden at number 19. I had Patrick Ewing at number 18. I had Charles Barkley at 17. Steve Nash at 16. Dwayne Wade at 15, Chris Paul at 14, Dirk Nowitzki at 13, and David Robinson at 12. And Dream, you had Giannis at 20, Kawhi at 19, James Harden at 18, Charles Barkley at 17, Steve Nash at 16, Chris Paul at 15, Dwayne Wade at 14, Dirk Nowitzki at 13, and David Robinson at 12.
Yeah,
Like
that's
me.
my list. Yeah.
So there we go. That for anyone who did miss last week's show, you'll hear more in depth about why we had certain players where we had them. But that was the 20 to 12 that we went through last week. This week we're gonna go with 11 to 1. We was gonna do the 20 to 11 last week, but we had
Yeah,
different number
but
11s. I didn't want
we
to give
did.
spoilers. So
Yeah.
this week we're gonna do 11 to 1. I'm gonna start with my number 11.
Okay, yeah. Let's get right into it, man. Let's
Yes,
get right into
right,
it.
right into it. We're gonna start with my number 11, which was Kevin Durant.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
I went with Kevin Durant. And the reason I went with Kevin Durant and you went with someone else who we'll get to, and I had that guy right above Kevin Durant. The reason I went with Kevin Durant is because of the fact that some of his later prime years have been derailed due to injuries. So the amount of value that I think he provided in years like 2019, obviously 2020 when he missed the whole year, 2021 even when he played half the regular season, 2022 when he played about 50 or so games, and even this year when he played about 50 or so games. So even though he's played maybe 15 high level years, some of them have been derailed by injuries to the point where if you're playing half a year each of the last 2 years, that's really only one whole season of value. So when we talk about KD, we can talk about his game, which we will get into. But the reason why I have KD at 11 and he just missed out on the top 10 is due to the injuries that I think have derailed parts of his career, especially in the later part. But you also got 2015 where he missed half the year with a broken foot. So those type of years is what held me back from having KD in the top 20. But I want to ask you, because you did have KD slightly higher than me, was that not a factor for you, or do you think KD's done enough to make that to where it wasn't that impactful?
I do think that's a factor because KD's later half years, not even just the later half year, you do also have 2015 where I forgot, I don't remember this specific of the injury, but he only played 20 something odd games and then had to miss the rest of the season. So that is also a factor too. I just came down to I just factored KD's longevity, like just how good he was those other years, because on the peak list I had Kevin Garnett, a top 10 peak player we've ever seen, and I didn't have KD. I don't even remember. I don't think I even had KD top 13 peak we've ever seen. So at peak wise, I'm taking Kevin Garnett, but KD, I just like those other years. I just like those other years a bit more than Garnett's 2011, 2012, 2013s. But to me, they're really close because I'm not gonna lie to you, Mars. I was contemplating on switching it, but I was like, we already had to push back the show, so I'm not gonna just switch it like just like that. So it's really close between KD and KG because I'll be honest with you, I don't think this year put a gap. I don't know if that's for you, but I don't think this year even put a gap between these two, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know how much KD really added to his career value with this year. Maybe because of the trade, plus he played around 47 games. The playoffs wasn't great for him, so I don't know how much he. Because when we get into this upper echelon, like this top 11, top 10, it takes a lot to like overtake some of these guys. Like, even though you're one spot behind them, it could be a larger gap than the one spot would suggest. So for me, KD just missed out, was at number 11. You spoke about the other guy just prematurely a little bit, but I want to ask you a little question about Kevin Durant.
Yes, sir.
When do you think KD really started to provide strong positive defensive value, and how many years do you think he's done that?
I say on the Golden State years, and I'd say
about year 9, year 10.
Yes, I'd say by year 9, year 10, because in those early KD's year, he started off as a negative to me. I think he was pretty late on his rotations, and he didn't use his length really well defensively, and people could take advantage of his size. So I don't think KD was that good of a defender. So I think in Golden State, when you put him in that system next to Draymond, next to Iguodala, and next to Clay, who was pretty good at the time as well, and how Steve Kerr would occasionally use him as in the five in that Hamptons five, that nickname they use. That's when we saw they maximize his defensive talents. And I don't think, again, I know people, and even himself was trying to push him DPOY level. Nah, I don't think KD was ever that, or even all defense caliber. But I do think he was a strong plus defender in those years in Golden State. Maybe not 2019, because I was rewatching 2019 just yesterday because I wanted to see just a little stuff of Curry's creation. I was watching KD too. But yeah, I don't know if 2019, but 2017, 2018, I think for sure. Those 2 years for sure, I think he was a strong positive defender.
What do you think about his years in Brooklyn defensively?
Now in Brooklyn, other than this year that he just got traded, I don't think he was that strong of a defender either. I think he was just a neutral at best. For some reason, them using him in the back line with Claxton being the guy to come up in all those pick and roll actions and have him just on the weak side, that's what maximized his most talents on defense. And he was looking really, really good defensively this year on the Brooklyn Nets. But other than that, I don't think it's anything crazy, to be honest with you.
Do you think I don't want to make this a Steve Nash coaching hate show, but do you think Steve Nash didn't utilize KD the correct way defensively, and that's why his value started to chip away? Or do you think it's the Achilles injury that kind of limited his mobility?
I think it's a part of the Achilles injury, and I just think it's a part of the personnel that they had in Brooklyn. They maximized so much of the offensive talent that they just couldn't bring in the actual defensive personnel. Like, could you name me, like, other than last year where they had Claxton, Royce O'Neal, Ben Simmons for a little time, can you name me the defenders they had on that roster?
Well, the Kyrie, that was Jesus.
Yeah, it's like you had Bruce Brown.
Bruce Brown, yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean,
it's like you don't. Yeah, it's like it's not a lot of things you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, because if Seth Curry's on that team, no.
Yeah.
You had old Goran Dragic, who wasn't
old indeed, bro.
Patty Mills was on that team.
Yeah.
And then you had as your backup big, you had Andre Drummond, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not. And then Steve Nash was also running 3-guard lineups in the playoffs defensively, which was also a terrible decision.
Just not doing them any favors with that.
Yeah, but KD being on some of the worst defensive units in Brooklyn, I mean, I do think part of that is I don't think he was an extremely strong defender, but also I do think Steve Nash and the Brooklyn roster construction was not conducive to a good defensive team. We spoke about KD's playmaking flaws before, and we spoke about his scoring versatility. Yeah. So we don't need to get too far into that. So I want to actually talk about my number 10 and your number 11.
Okay, yeah, we could, because I don't think the talk around him is justified.
I have Kevin Garnett at 10. You have him at number 11. I want you to go first and tell me, A, why you had him just behind KD, and B, how close was it for KG to break into that top 10?
It was really close because Kevin Garnett, we're talking about obviously one of the greatest defenders we've ever seen. I did a really in-depth talk about that in the peak, so this one will be pretty short. Just very versatile, probably the most versatile defender we've ever seen, one of the greatest communicators on defense. But I really want to just talk about his offense because his limitations as a scorer, like not having a post game, did limit his offense. And it's one of the reasons why I do think even if he had the offensive personnel, they were still going to be limited if he was the number one option. So I do think that he needed that number one option to really help him as a scorer, which I don't think KD really needed. But him being a strong floor spacer, especially for the time, he's a 45% career mid-range shooter. Just looked up that, I'm getting my stats. He was actually, he was just under 50% as well on just long two. So for that time and for that era and spacing, that mattered. Him being that strong spacer in the mid-range really did matter. And he was one of the best passing bigs. Like, it's about to be crazy what I'm saying, but he was actually one of the best passing bigs we've ever seen. Like, if you actually go back and look at the articles people were talking about, he was in legit conversations and being one of the best passing bigs we've ever seen. And that's just because Garnett had such a strong feel for passing. Like he had a really good driving kick game. And there were just multiple times I brought it up last time too, that the Timberwolves, it got so bad for them because they just didn't have adequate ball handlers, that Garnett had to be the guy to handle the ball and bring up the ball up the court on multiple occasions. And that's just crazy because I feel like if he would have developed a better post game, because he had a very good skip pass, and if Garnett would have been just a bit better in the post, could you imagine him utilizing those skip passes when teams send doubles sometimes, when he's just absolutely torching that one-on-one defender?
I mean, that level of advantage creation at that time. I mean,
Yeah,
that's. I'm not obviously not Shaq level gravity, but that ability
yeah,
to do those things was probably from a big man only matched by Shaq at that time. So I mean, that would have added another extremely high value wrinkle to his offensive game. But I wanna touch on. For me, I spoke about this with Dirk in the last episode.
hmm
Kevin Garnett's adaptability is something that I value a lot. When you going back and watching Kevin Garnett early on as a perimeter defender exclusively, he played. I'm not going to say he played like a three, but his ability to guard on the perimeter, his ability to, I'd say at that point he couldn't guard fives. I don't think he was strong enough.
hmm
But one through four convincingly, and sometimes they would put him on point guards because of how quick he could move his feet, his
yeah.
length, his
Like
ability to recover.
if you go look at some of those games against Jason Kidd, he would occasionally just switch out to Jason Kidd for the entire possession.
Yeah, those type of abilities, that's the level of scalability you have with a big who can comfortably guard one through four at that time without giving up a mismatch is something that you can't really replicate with many players. Then I think he always had a strong feel for his passing. I do think his scoring developed stronger later on. His mid-range jump shot was there. He did come in with like a guard-like skill set. He didn't have much of a power game, which is something we spoke about on his peaks, like profile, I guess. But and then when you look at, I'm going to avoid his peak because we spoke about it. Go check out the
Yeah,
great
we did.
the
We
peaks
did.
the peaks episode. So when you look at his years in Boston, defensively, him becoming more of an anchor, maybe a bit less mobile, but still able to help him recover, use his length, able to disrupt shots. His IQ, his motor was still all there. Then his ability is less of an on-ball creator, but as a connective passer and a connective creator, someone who could find cutters, find Paul Pierce, be able to play out the short roll, those type of things that he was able to bring that just provide so much value on a strong team like Boston was, is something that I think gets overlooked. I do think, not to be an accolade guy, I do think he was
hmm
second in MVP his first year in Boston. I could be wrong about that, but I do think Kevin Garnett had a strong case even in '08 to be one of the best players in the world,
Yeah, no,
top, if not top
I think,
three,
yeah,
top five.
I was gonna say he has a pretty strong argument in 08, and it's kind of sad too. In 09, I feel like that would have been another year he would have been up there, but that he got injured, so it's kind of unfortunate. But I do feel like Garnett had the worst situation like out of any of these superstars. Like Minnesota just
Yeah,
did not do
they
him
did
any
more. They did
favors.
more than a disservice to Kevin Garnett with what
Yes,
they were doing.
yes,
The
man,
Joe Smith situation was terrible. The one time
yes.
they did have a competent roster, Sam Cassell got hurt in the conference finals and ended up losing to the Lakers. But that does bring me to my final question about Kevin Garnett before we move on. How much do you hold it against him, if at all, Kevin Garnett having 3 years where he didn't make the playoffs and couldn't give you that playoff value?
Of course, it's I hate not using the word against him, but it ultimately is, because if I'm seeing this guy, like for example Tim Duncan, just being able to get more years in the playoffs and actually give me the playoff sample size, it's hard for me to use that. Like, it's hard for me to be like, man, I have to use that against KG just a little bit, because yeah, KG, you're giving me that in the regular season, but at the end of the day, we're not seeing that value in the postseason, while your counterpart is actually still playing in the postseason as well, and he's playing just as good as he was in the regular season. So it is suck that I do have to just a little bit. I don't think it's that much of a tax against him, because at the end of the day, I feel like if you gave KG a competent roster, a legit competent one, we saw in those early years, he's taking teams to the playoffs. At bare minimum, he's taking you to the playoffs, and if you're gonna actually give him even a better supporting cast, he can take you pretty deep into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's similar for me. I do have to, not tax, but I do have to look at
Yeah,
it. realistically and say you didn't provide me with any player value, so I do have to look at that and take that into account. But then I do think it's reasonable to assume a player with KG skill set does translate pretty fine to the playoffs, just based on the things we've detailed on not only this episode in the last 7 or so minutes, but also in our peak episode, speaking about what KG does bring to the table. So I do think it's reasonable to assume.
I mean, still
those things
currently
do translate.
the 08 team by relative to era is still the best defense in NBA history. And that wasn't a crazy defensive infrastructure, but it goes to show even when he was past his peak, that I would say he still led the greatest defense in NBA history according to the stats, according to relative to the defensive rating.
And I implore anyone to go watch the 08 Celtics in the playoffs. Maybe not the first round against the Hawks. That was a bit iffy. I don't know why they went to Game 7.
Yeah,
with
they went
them,
to 7 with the Hawks. That's crazy.
But I do implore anyone to go watch the 08 Celtics in the playoffs and in the regular season. That was just a really strong defensive team. Kevin Garnett was the best player on that team, contrary to anyone who might tell you it was Paul Pierce. I mean, it wasn't. No disrespect to Paul Pierce, but he was not the best player on that team. But before we move on to the actual people within our top 10 above the 10th spot, we have a couple super chats that I'd like to read. Anistius, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong, said Game 7 feels like it will be a Mavs Sun remake. You've alluded to something similar to that with a 30 point
I
blowout.
think I don't know if it goes to 50 something. I'm really gone for sure. But I do think it's going to be a 20-point. Boston handily takes over.
As the person watching from a fan's perspective, which I am, I just want to see a really close game. That's what I want to see. I want to see a game that comes down to the wire, kind of like last night was.
Now, I don't want that faith, because here's the thing: if it comes down to the wire, I actually think Miami's going to win that game. I think there's no in between. I think there's
you guys clutch time execution is pretty strong. Yes. I don't really bet against you guys in the clutch, but I do want to see a close game. I don't want to be tapped out by the second quarter because it's 65-27. I don't want that. And one more super chat here from Jalen Carter. Shout out to Jalen. I'm just here for Mars to put LeBron at 1 and use those same arguments myself, so Mars will stop trolling me on PC. We will see if LeBron James.
You're gonna be stealing arguments. I get it, but hey, at the end of the day, we will see. Mars is just giving you takes on what he watched, man. That's all you gotta do. Just watch basketball.
We will see if LeBron James makes that 1. I don't want to give any guys any spoilers.
You're saying he might not even make top 5? Oh, let me stop.
Who knows? We still got 9 more spots to go. I want to talk about your number 9.
Okay.
You went with Magic Johnson. So tell me a little bit about why you went with Magic Johnson at 9.
I think Magic is one of those few guys that his peak was like pretty, like, let's say you did give it to 3 years. I think it's been pretty consistent, like from 84-85 to 89-91. He's been pretty much just at that level. I think Magic was really, really good. What held him back from being any higher is just the amount of years, and we're going to talk about that with another player pretty shortly. But I think because of the amount of years he couldn't accumulate, I think I had to hold him back just a bit. But if we're just talking about just player, like Magic's one of the greatest players we've ever seen, bro. Like a 6'9" guy, blazing speed in transition, finding cutters at a historic rate. Like I said, was just a layup creator. This man just created layups for teammates just out of thin air. We're talking about like one of the greatest offensive players we've ever seen, one of the most unique passers we've ever seen, and he was a very efficient scorer. And I talked about it, and I told you, Mars, is once the Lakers offense started to take a jump and that Lakers team took a jump, is once Magic became a more efficient player. Once he actually started to refine his scoring game and, create a little post game, and he actually became a better scorer and more efficient, they just became an entirely different team. And that's why, they were the team of that era, to me, in my opinion, because of Magic. Of course, he had help. He had James Worthy, Michael Cooper, Kareem, Byron Scott. Of course, he had help. But I do think Magic deserves his respect, because that was ridiculous. Those are ridiculous. Unfortunately, we don't have the shots created numbers, because I'm not gonna go back and watch every single game of Magic and be the stat head for that. But I think Magic is if somebody ever did track that stat, I think he'd be number one in being able to just create the most layups for his teammates because he was ridiculous at that. Like that specifically, I find that ridiculous because we talked about it. To being one of the greatest playmakers is not only just generating shots, is the efficient shots you're generating. If Magic is constantly generating open layup attempts, that's like the most quality shot you can create to me because it's literally just a basket at the rim. That's basically 100% shot for NBA players. 99% because they're gonna miss.
Yeah, with
bunnies.
the amount of bunnies I
Yeah,
saw some of
yeah.
Magic's teammates miss, I might have
I
to
was
look
gonna say.
about
I was gonna
85.
say maybe we have to dial it down a
Yeah,
bit. But
maybe a little bit, but I do agree with most of the sentiment you said about Magic Johnson. I do personally think he did take another jump in around 87 when it
yeah,
comes to the fact that I do think his scoring aggression ramped up. That's when I do think his jump shot in the mid range, not really from three, but I do think that's when that really started to elevate. The post game got added. They went to Kareem less and started playing more Magic Johnson basketball. I think that's when he really elevated to a whole nother level. I do think early on, you saw what Magic Johnson could be early on, but it was a lot more, I don't want to say inconsistent, but I want to say it was more erratic. The decision making, you could see he saw every pass there was to make, but sometimes the delivery was a little off. Sometimes he got turnovers when he didn't need to get turnovers. Sometimes he would force a pass through a window that wasn't really there. And I do think he started to dial those out of his game in the later years, probably around 83, 84, 85. I do think that's when he hit another. So if I had to put Magic's career in stages, I'd say you had the early Magic Johnson, who was the aggressive initiator, who would try every pass possible, high risk, high reward type playmaker. Then you'd have the second phase of Magic, which was not more conservative, but more selective with his decision making. I think he was a lot more consistent with the reads he was making, and there was a lot less terrible turnovers, which I think he got a lot of early on in his career. And then you got the late stage Magic Johnson, which was a stronger scorer, stronger decision maker, a bit less in transition. They actually started to slow down a little bit more. But for me, the thing that I have Magic at 8, not 9. Yeah. So the thing that gave Magic the edge over the person you have at 8 and the person I have at 9, for me, was the fact that I still think he provided enough years at a higher level compared to the next person, who I think, even though they peaked higher, Magic Johnson from the day he entered the NBA was playing at an all-star level, in my opinion. I don't think the next person was doing that. And Magic Johnson having 10, 11 years at that level and then obviously peaking the way he did was enough for me to give him the edge. And I do think, I want to ask you, how much higher do you think Magic Johnson could have climbed if not for the early retirement due to the virus?
Oh, I think he would have been top 5 easy. I think he would have been easily top 5. I do feel like sometimes people could underrate Magic's offensive game. Obviously, I'm not talking about like the overall mass. I'm just talking about some specific people I'll talk to because they'll look at the points per game and they'll be like, oh, there's a player in today's NBA, let's just say Jokic, he's giving me 25 to like 27 points and he's giving me basically the same amount of assists. But again, people, that's just not how you gauge an offensive player. If it's just points per game and assists, then technically Wilt Chamberlain would be the best because he had a 50-point game, and was averaging that 1 year he averaged like 10 assists too. So that's just not how you gauge an offensive player, which I really hate.
It's not.
That.
We might do a show talking about.
No, we will have to do a show doing that.
And stuff. We might have to do that. I've got a lot of things in the chamber that I'm trying to work out what we should do and when we should do it. But I want to touch a little bit on Magic Johnson's defense because that is quite polarizing.
Okay. Yeah.
I think Magic Johnson defense peaked earlier on in his career. I think from maybe his first or second year, I think that's the best he was as a defender. I think that's when he was at his quickest. I think that's when he was faster. I think maybe because of the scheme they implemented, they did sort of send I want to say like a half court trap where Magic Johnson was kind of like playing behind the plays and he could pick off passes and play like a free safety role. And that would really like help his defensive impact because when you actually put him on an island on the ball, he was very suspect. So I do think that probably helped him defensively. But for me, the issue I always had with Magic was the fact that functionally defensively, he was a wing. He wasn't a point guard. He didn't defend. He didn't defend ones. He always defended wings or stretch bigs because he wasn't quick enough to stay in front of guards. But the issue I had was you always had to sort of hide Magic Johnson. There wasn't anywhere where he was particularly strong. He couldn't play near the rim defensively because he didn't provide any sort of rim deterrence. He couldn't play on the ball on the perimeter because laterally he wasn't very fast. He could be caught flat-footed. Changes of direction were very problematic for him. And then even like in the post, he wasn't particularly strong, so he didn't provide much value there. So for me, how much value do you think Magic Johnson loses from the fact that at his size, he didn't bring any strong value anywhere defensively?
I think he does lose a bit value, but I do think the only part he does just gives just a bit is the steals. But even that, because he would jump a lot in passing lanes, it just led to like big plays at the other end. But I do think it does chip away at his overall value at the end of the day, because if we're talking about Magic Johnson, I'll be honest with you, defense should not be one of the first things you bring up if you're trying to be positive about him, of course, because he provided very, very, very little value on defense. So I do think it matters that we do bring it up because it does chip away at his overall value on defense. So
yeah, I pretty much share the same sentiment. I want to talk about your number 8, my number 9, Stephen Curry. So
Steph Curry's your number at 9 or 8? You said
he's my number 9, right behind Magic Johnson, and he was your number. Oh, he's actually your okay. My fault.
Yeah.
My fault. And this is a surprise to me. I'm misreading. we can still talk about him. I'm going to talk about him as my number 9, Stephen Curry. The reason why I had him behind Magic Johnson is because of the totality of years. Early on, Steph Curry, he came in, he was a strong player, he was a good player, obviously derailed by ankle injuries in like year 2 and year 3. Really elevated to like all-star level in 2013. And then I think he's pushed on ever since then from 2013 to now. But he's also missed the 2020 season, which is another season where he didn't provide anything. Obviously, no playoff run in 2021 because they missed the playoffs. That also hurts him. But then you've got 2013 postseason and full season, 2014, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 22, and this past season, 23, which doesn't really move the needle too much because of the amount of time he missed. But for me, the biggest issue I had with Steph Curry was how he was a clear negative defensively up until around 2017. So for me, him obviously peaking as one of the best offensive players ever, even prior to 2017, but giving back, I want to say solid, like giving back a bit of value on the other end did hurt him a little bit in some of these discussions. But then also, when you look at Steph Curry from an offensive impact perspective, it's kind of hard to argue 5 people above him. Yeah. We spoke about it in the peak profile. I spoke about how well the Golden State Warriors team performs with him on the floor, with any sort of assortment of talent. I spoke about with Clay and Draymond, with just KD, without all of them. And the common denominator seems to be Steph Curry. But the biggest hesitancy I have is not only the lack of longevity. I think of anyone who we both have in the top 10, he's played the least amount of games. Also, he's probably played the least amount of games at the all-time level. So we both obviously hold his peak in such high regards. I want to ask you, because you have him higher than I expected. I want to ask you what it was that made you comfortable placing Steph where you placed him.
I think what made me comfortable was for as good Magic and for as good we're not going to mention him yet, but he fits the bill. I think all those 3 guys are the 3 guys that I feel like they lack the longevity, right? Like I think all 3 of them had 9 to 10 years that they were this good. Well, now Curry, unfortunately, but for Curry, he can actually still go. So that's his benefit. So eventually he can get himself
at
out of this
35 as well.
Yeah, he's at 35 years old, but he can eventually get himself out of it. But again, we're talking about currently today, May 28th, 5:34 Eastern for me. Who knows what time it is for Mars?
10:34 p.m. So a bit later for me.
But yeah, for that time, I think because they were that close, and I have to be consistent, I do think Curry is I said it last time, the best offensive player in NBA history. And you're right. I can't fight the defense notion, because even in these playoffs, as much credit I give Curry, and I have to be consistent because I saw somebody was getting on me in the chat, I'll bring up Curry's defense. Even in this playoffs, if you look back in that Lakers series, LeBron was hunting for Steph, especially in those
Mm-hmm.
fourth quarters when it got close. And for me, I've been talking about how Steph on a good defensive unit can be a positive. And he's done that for these last few years. But the problem is he can still be hunting. Again, he's still 6'3, 190, 200 pounds. And he's going to get hunting on occasion. And that's what made the Lakers offense as efficient as it was in the half court, because they just kept, hey, Steph, come over here. We're just going to mismatch hunt you. Let's get you on LeBron. Let's attack you. Even Lonnie Walker was getting his licks against Steph. So, of course, the defense has to be used against them, because I do think him and Magic, both of them are I'd say, those are the, I think
They're
those
the
two were
weakest defenders
I
of
think they're the
the.
weakest defenders of the top 10. And I think they're that close, but I just decided to lean to Steph's offense being greater than them. That's where I took the opportunity and be like, I think I'm going to take Steph. I think him being a better offensive player for those amount of years he gave me. And I don't think these guys are gapping them in longevity. They're legit just that close. I'm just going to take Steph's years over the Magic, for example. But it's close, bro. I'll be honest with you. That's why I wasn't shaking my head that you had Magic over Curry, because of course I don't think it's a bad take.
Yeah, I don't think it's obviously crazy to have Steph over Magic or the guy who we're going to talk about next. To I was a bit surprised that you had Steph over, but I think we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't talk about Steph Curry being the greatest shooter of all time and how much impact that does provide. Anytime you bring up Steph Curry, you have to talk about the fact that he is the greatest shooter to ever exist in a basketball court. But I've been thinking recently, I do this a lot. I just ask myself some questions and I'm like, what do I think about this? So I want to put the question to you.
Okay, yeah, let me hear them, man.
What is more valuable? And this question might sound crazy, so maybe I have to explain it. What is more valuable? Steph Curry's ability to shoot or Steph Curry's threat to be able to shoot? And the way I'll explain it, because
I was gonna say you gotta explain it, because that one is
I have to explain what's going on in my brain. So chat, stay with me, dream, stay with me. What I mean by this is, do you remember when Steph Curry was going through his slump last season?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Teams were still guarding him as if he was the best shooter of all time.
Yeah.
And he was
Even
still
though he was
creating the
not
same
shooting that way.
advantages.
Yeah.
And he was still creating the same advantages that he always creates because of the fact that teams respect his ability to shoot, even when the shots aren't dropping. So I want to ask you, is it more valuable that Steph Curry can shoot as well as he does, or that teams think he can shoot as well as he does? Like, if Steph was guarded like a regular person with his shooting ability, is that more or less valuable than the way teams guard him currently, whether or not he makes or misses shots?
I think it's the one you just named, because I always reference that slump to people, because that was kind of a crazy way, because Steph was just on that crazy slump. I think he was shooting like 26% from three, and it was a good amount of games. I think it was a healthy like 15 game, maybe even more sample size of him just not shooting well from three. But guess what? Teams aren't going to be like, okay, Steph shooting 20 something percent from three. Let's mix in some drop here. Nope. It was still blitz. It was still, we're gonna show and we're gonna recover. It was still the same old defensive terrorist like schemes they'd use against Steph, and he was still creating tons of advantages. The only problem about your example though is how far is it going? Or how far is your example going? Because if eventually Steph, for like let's just say 3 years, he's still shooting 26% for three. Teams would obviously change.
Yeah, because teams will alter the way they guard someone who isn't deemed as a threat anymore. And obviously, Steph Curry gets that treatment because of everything he's shown before. So it does go hand in hand. And when you try and separate it, some things do get tangled up. But my thinking is, if Steph Curry was guarded like a regular person from three, would he shoot so much better? Like, he shoots around 42% now. Would he shoot so much better, like 47, 48, because he's being guarded like a regular person? And so where that would boost his team's offense more substantially, or is the shots he creates with his threat to score, drawing two people on him, or always having to trap him off a ball screen, and always having defenses focused on you to where people can get backdoor layups, even if he's shooting 5 or 6% worse at 42%, 38%, even in 2022. Which one makes his team's offense better? I tend to lean towards his threat to score, his threat to shoot, over his actual ability to shoot the ball. But obviously, over the course of time, if he just shot 30% forever, I don't think he would have that same threat. So that's why I posed the question. Chat, if you guys want to get involved and give me some answers. I see some people say it's the threat, some people say it's the shooting. It's just a question. I don't have. There's no definitive answer. There's no right or wrong answer. I couldn't tell you which one it is.
I do like what the slam dunk touchdown said. He says Steph has established a reputation where his threat is more valuable, and that's fair. And that's exactly what happened in that slump because he already established he can shoot 40 bombs with a hand in his face, just swish. Teams still weren't going to switch it up just because he's shooting 22% from three now. Right? They're gonna be like,
Yeah,
nah, because one night, what if he does just start hitting all them threes again? Now it's all.
yeah. Then you proceed to lose by 60 points,
Yeah,
and Steph Curry has 16 threes.
yeah.
So I do think that was just an interesting question. Chat, just let me know who you think, what you think is the correct answer. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just a theoretical question, I guess. But I want to move on to your number 8 and my number. Let's see where I have this guy. Number 7. My number 7. Um, Larry Bird. Tell
Mhm.
me why Larry Bird. Well, you explained why he's behind Steph Curry. So just tell me a little bit about Larry Bird's game and what led you to have him over Magic Johnson.
Now I will say it might be, of course, these lists are of course gonna have some bias, but for Bird, the reason why is Bird is like one of my most fun players to go back and actually look at the film and actually watch his game because Bird was a ridiculous basketball player, just like how all these other 11 players were. But I just was very fond of his passing ability, especially just his touch passing, especially how like he could just boop, just get the ball just that instant away and actually hit his target right on time. Like sometimes he'd hit the person just like how Jokic does it now to like MPJ or Aaron Gordon. Like he'll quickly throw a touch pass to his teammate before they even realize they're open. And how quickly he can pass a ball through a gap in a defense and how like quick his deliveries are with his passing. And I think that's just one of his greatest traits as a player because we always talk about Magic Johnson as a passer. And I'm not gonna say Larry Bird's a better passer, but Larry Bird was a darn good passer, man. Like a darn good passer. His playmaking, though, was limited. And that was mainly because of him and the scheme that they used to have him more off ball. We talked about that, Mars. And that just had to go with his ball handling too. He wasn't able to really pressure defenses in the way like Magic, in the way like Steph Curry, in the way like LeBron. He just wasn't able to pressure defenses that same way. But I do feel like just his passing ability and how that made him one of the more scalable offensive players we've ever seen. I think that matters. And we're talking about his outside shooting. That's one of the things that Berg gets raved about. His outside shooting really mattered to that team, really mattered to guys like McHale, Parrish to be able to attack down low in the post. And you just space Larry Bird in the corner because he was the best shooter of that era. And his shooting really mattered, especially him being a very good catch and shooter. Birds, the only problem with Bird, and of course I gotta get to the bad things too. Um, one of the problems with Bird was his scoring and how that translated in the playoffs. Because there has been certain people that get on Bird's scoring translated in the playoffs, and rightfully so, because Bird's inability to sometimes not be able to get to the rim as good as a lot of these other guys really did hurt his ability at the end of the day. But I do feel like Bird being such the amazing passer he was, and then he was still a strong defender, was very active, high motor, solid shot blocker too. I do think that Bird from 85 to 87 ish, I think he peaked as a scorer. I think that's when Bird peaked as a scorer. And I think overall his 86 87 season was his best year. And I do think from his first year in the league, giving just amazing value all the way until that back injury. He was done. It's unfortunately because I really do think Bird, if he just gave me 3 more years, I could have pushed some nasty agendas. I really could have, Mars. I really could have pushed some nasty Bird agendas.
I wouldn't blame you either. Larry Bird is probably one of the more exciting players to go back and watch. I sometimes go back and just watch Larry Bird games, not to do any sort of analysis or anything, just to go back and enjoy watching those Celtics teams and Larry Bird. I don't think it's a coincidence that Larry Bird peaked as a scorer around 85, 86, etc. I do think it does coincide with the Dennis Johnson acquisition, who was able
Yeah.
to get him easier looks. Larry Bird, when he had to do more self-creation, I do think he struggled because we spoke about, I do think his finishing at the rim was a bit more inconsistent. Obviously, the free ball wasn't heavily emphasized, and I don't think Larry Bird was as good of a 3-point shooter as maybe the numbers would suggest. And I do think you can look at some of the playoff series against stronger defenses, how not only how little he shot them, but when he did shoot them, they weren't to the highest rate. And I do think that's because he would much rather shoot the 16-footer, the mid-range game, where he was the best in the league at that time. His off-ball activity you spoke about as a passer, as a scorer, I do obviously all those things are correct.
Oh, and his off-ball ability too. You just I forgot to even mention that.
100%, and how that impacted his ability to rebound as well. Just from some basket cuts that would give him deep positioning for offensive rebounds, that could give him easy second chance opportunities, backdoor cuts, which Dennis Johnson often used to find him with those easy layups at the rim, which did boost his efficiency in those later years. Defensively, for me, Larry Bird was a legitimate positive for, I'd say, half of his career. Once his back started to deteriorate, I do think it did start to suffer. But I do think, obviously, as a rebounder, he was extremely strong. He had extremely good hands. His perception and his ability to read passing lanes without really giving up too much in terms of high risk, high reward plays. He really wouldn't really gamble. It was just he would make the right read and then get steals and deflections and forced turnovers, which was really valuable. Also, he had really strong hands, which I think I spoke about. His ability to double the post with his length and size was really strong. He also played defense in a similar role to Magic Johnson, but he just did it much better. He also could
way better than Magic.
He couldn't guard guards just like Magic Johnson could. He would guard wings and stretch fours. He had a bit more strength, so he could also guard in the post against some weaker post players. So for me, Larry Bird, that's what gave me the edge with Larry Bird over Magic Johnson, is the defensive gap. Plus, I do think there's maybe I do think he was stronger earlier on out the gate as well. So that's what gave me the edge with Larry Bird over Magic Johnson and Steph Curry. You just went with Larry Bird over Magic Johnson, which is fine. Obviously, I think they're all in the same realm. We all had them 9, 8, and 7. So that's fair enough. Before we move on to our numbers 6, I believe we're at 6 or 7.
Yeah, that's 7, I think.
I believe so. Alan,
no, it's 6. It's 6. You're right, 6.
There we go, 6. See, smart. Alan R with the super chat. Mars is the GOAT. Celtics in 7. Dub on fraud watch. For anyone who didn't see Dub's reaction to the game, I advise you to go check it out.
I'm gonna have to check it out right after this show. Yeah,
it was amazing and definitely worth it.
Oh wow.
And the last super chat before we move on, Greatest with the super chat. Shout out to Greatest. He's always showing love in the chat. Maybe sometimes not always love, sometimes a bit of hate too, but we appreciate all the dialogue. Kobe is number 1 or 2 if I had a lie detector test. Shout out to the chat. Billy Bob, the Slam Dunk, ZBT, Big Dog, Shad, and Go Knicks, run it back. Yeah, shout out to everyone in the chat. We got around 200 people in here. Appreciate everyone who's here watching live. If you haven't already, please like the stream. And everyone who does watch after the fact, I also appreciate you. Everyone who taps in, we appreciate everyone.
We do.
We wouldn't be doing this show if no one was watching, unfortunately. If there was one person watching, we probably wouldn't be doing this show. So I do appreciate everyone who taps in. But to move swiftly on, we're going to move on to number 6. I'm going to go with your number 6, and I'm going to go with Tim Duncan. So tell me why you went with Tim Duncan at number 6.
I think Tim Duncan has easily one of the greatest longevities of like a player we've ever seen, and out of the gate, it's one of the greatest things Tim Duncan fans like to bring up, but it's rightfully so. Right out of the gate, I think he was giving you damn near just MVP level value. Just off the gate was giving you that. And he was giving you that for a good amount of years. And even when he stopped giving you that MVP level value, and even though, his overall athleticism, the value he brought on offense started to diminish, he still was one of the best defenders we've ever seen, especially his defense. I do think that longevity, I think, is the best. I don't know what it is with Duncan, but him being able to just be that good of a defender for so long, is kind of ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie to you. It is kind of ridiculous. And I do feel like sometimes people don't give Duncan's credit for his peak because as much as we credit his longevity and how good that is, and of course we have to bring that up because he has one of the craziest longevities we've ever seen. At his peak, Duncan was that ridiculous as well, especially on defense. But that's when his offense was really that good, and that's just what made him all the world difference. Like he played with Shaq in an era that you could have legitimately made an argument in some of those years that Duncan was just better than Shaquille O'Neal. And that's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie to you. That's kind of crazy. That
I mean,
Duncan,
anyone being better than Pete Shaq because
yes.
that's a tall task.
And
But the
it's
fact
and I'm
that it
talking
wasn't
about you can
crazy,
make you can make a legitimate argument that he was legit better than Shaq. And that's kind of crazy because his length on defense was ridiculous. One of the greatest post defenders we've ever seen. And during his peak years, actually had a bit mobility, contrary to belief, because in those other years, yeah, his mobility just wasn't there. But his mobility was there on recovery defense, but on perimeter containing ball handlers, just wasn't there. But he still was one of the greatest rim protectors we've ever seen. And on offense, him just having that isolation game and him being just a good enough passer, he was good enough to lead those offenses to such good rates that him being, the best defender you can argue for that era next to KG was good enough for those Spurs teams to always be in contention to win a championship. And that's the lion's share of that credit goes to Duncan. So I am one of the people, I give my respect to Duncan. I 100% will.
I mean, I think you covered it. I also asked on the peak episode, is rookie Tim Duncan the best defensive rookie season we've ever
I
seen?
think I
I
think he
spoke
probably
about David
should.
Robinson, but Tim Duncan, I mean, coming in out of Wake Forest, he was a 4-year college player, so that probably did help him.
Yeah.
But
But wasn't
defensively at
wasn't
that
wasn't
time,
David too? Well, he went to the
they yeah,
military.
David Robinson didn't come in until he was 24, so he
Yeah,
was
he
an
was at
older.
he went to he did the college and then went to military. So he
Yeah,
was
so he was an extremely older
yeah.
rookie. So that would explain why maybe they were the two best defensive rookie seasons we've ever seen. But that just shows like he came into the NBA and he was, I think it would be undoubtedly one of the best starts to a career we've ever seen. From
Yeah.
97 to like 05, that 8-year stretch of Tim Duncan, it would be hard to rival anyone else's first 8 years against that. He did start to decline offensively post that. I still think he was a very strong offensive player, 06, 07, 08, etc. Especially 06. I go back and watch the 06 Spurs versus Dallas a lot all the time. It's a very entertaining series. Dirk and Tim Duncan going back and forth. If anyone wants to see some entertaining 2000s basketball, I implore you to go watch that
No
series.
doubt.
It's fantastic. But my I don't want to say issue with Tim Duncan, but my hesitation with Tim Duncan is
Mhm.
his offensive play.
Yeah.
I do think he was a willing playmaker and passer, but I do think you would require a level of not just perimeter creation, but I do think what you need around Tim Duncan to have an extremely high level offense is probably more than you need for other players. I don't think you need an extremely high level offense because of how good he makes your defense. So you can afford to have a lesser offense, which is what the Spurs did. But for me, someone who wasn't a particularly strong off ball player, he was heavy isolation. The outside shot wasn't elite, it was strong, but it wasn't elite. Then you look at other factors to, I don't want to call Tim Duncan ball dominant. That sounds like I'm being
Mhm. Yeah.
disingenuous. But he did hold the ball when it was his scoring possessions more than the average big, and some possessions could sort of fizzle out if his option didn't come through. He also wasn't particularly strong going to his left hand, and that did limit him in terms of counters. But he was really strong, and that would help him chisel out easy opportunities that a guy like KG, who we brought up earlier, couldn't do. And that's why I think his playoff scoring was more consistent than Kevin Garnett, and that's why I ultimately have him higher. But I want to ask you, how much value do you think Tim Duncan was still providing into the mid 2010s, like 2013, 14, 15, 16? Do you still think he was a borderline top 15 player in the league at that point?
That's a good question. I do think he was still a strong all-star. I do think in those years. So whether that's top 15, I can't say 100% certainty, but I do think he for sure. No, probably he was top 15. I'll be honest with you, because even though his offense started to deteriorate, even though, and Pop started to build that system more to modernize that Spurs offense, that defense that he was still being able to give as a rim protector is kind of crazy. Like that longevity on defense. Like I'm gonna keep mentioning it because I feel like it has to. Like I think he probably has the best defensive longevity other than maybe this other guy. Probably still probably has a better defensive longevity just because of the amount of years that Duncan had is kind of crazy. But I do think he was still a strong all-star 2013 and 2012 100%.
Yeah, I'm probably right there with you in terms of that evaluation. Um, and then next, the guy who really can't be separated from Tim Duncan. I mean, when you bring up one of them, the other one doesn't seem to be
The
too
guys are
far
just right
behind.
next to each other. Yeah.
Obviously that is Kobe Bryant, who you went with at number 5.
Mhm.
So obviously Kobe played 20 years, 96 to 2016. Post the Achilles, there wasn't many strong years. I don't think they provided much to you in terms of your ranking. Also, maybe the first couple of years were probably hit and miss. So what do you think about Kobe from around 98 to 2013, the 15-year stretch where he did provide most of his value?
I think that though that is basically you can say that's his prime, right? From that amount of years, he was really really good. I think again, we people talk about it all day, every day, and I'm gonna talk about it again. Kobe was just an unreal scorer, and like it was really hard to really bother Kobe because he would always be able to get in his spots. He lived around the mid range area, had a poser game, had a pull up jumper, was great in the pick and roll, had amazing footwork, had a pretty tight handle. He was just so versatile as a scorer, was a good finisher, was an amazing mid range shooter, could shoot the three ball. Kobe just had it all on as a scorer. I'm saying not all on offense. I was about to say all on offense. I was about to get crazy, but he almost had it all on as a scorer. And as for as much as he gets the ball hog label, Kobe Bryant was a very darn good playmaker. One of his great moves that I was telling Mars about this on one of the other pods. I can't remember the specific date. That one of my favorite passes was your ability to like when you blend your shot fake, like you jump up like you're gonna shoot the ball, and then you pass it. And Kobe did that a lot, and that's one of his favorite moves on being able to create for his teammates. And he did that a lot. He was being able to create for his teammates whenever he'd pressure the rim with those lay down passes. Kobe Bryant was a very strong playmaker, contrary to belief. I feel like a lot of people just call him a ball hog because of that Smush Parker statement. But if you actually do your due diligence, go back and watch the games, Kobe was passing the ball. I'm not gonna say he didn't have some games where he was really in the tunnel vision, which did still hurt him as a playmaker because tunnel vision, your willingness as a passer is entwined with how good you are as a playmaker. And if you're not that willing to make those plays, I'm gonna have to tax you a bit. So of course Kobe gets taxed for that. But because he was such an unreal scorer, was one of the best perimeter defenders we've ever seen, especially his ability to navigate screens, I do think Kobe to me lands in the top 5. Although I do think him again, it's nasty, but it's my cop out. I'm always gonna go to it. I do think Duncan and Kobe are that close where it's damn near interchangeable. But I understand the Duncan argument. I 100% understand it because you can say better longevity, better peak, Dunzo, better defense. Like that's here. You can go the easy way. I went with Kobe.
Yeah, I'm never gonna criticize someone for having Kobe over Duncan. I do think it can go either way. I want to speak about, for me, Kobe's defense is probably the most polarizing part of his game. And I do
It
think that
is.
determines how high or how low someone would have Kobe Bryant. For me, when you look at Kobe Bryant at his peak defensively early on around 99 to like 01, that ability to play
Be safe,
on board,
greatest. Be safe. Oh,
that
Grady
ability
said he was dipping.
Oh yeah, shout out to Greatest, shout
Yeah.
out to Greatest. That ability to be an on-ball defender to the level in which Kobe Bryant was, he was a menace defensively for that stretch, was extremely valuable. However, and this might be where some Kobe
Mm.
fans get mad at me and some Kobe
Oh
haters
yeah, the
start to love
comments
me.
about to come at you, bro.
I do think there was a noticeable decline in his defense post around 03. I think as he grew in terms of his offensive output, I believe he not only took more plays off defensively, I think he was more susceptible to some sort of breakdowns on the ball and off the ball defensively, which did start to chip away at his value. And when I evaluate Kobe Bryant, his career defensive value, I do view him as a positive, strong defender. But I think even as you progress into the mid to late 2000s with the Pau Gasol teams, his ability to guard on the ball, I think, gets overstated by the fact that late in games he could switch on to the other team's best player and he could give you strong possessions. But when you look at it in totality for 44 minutes of the 48, he would often play on a team's weakest offensive player. He wouldn't really be active off the
Yeah,
ball.
he'd be on the spot up. Yeah.
Yeah, he wouldn't really be active off the ball. He didn't provide much at the rim at that point. It was a lot more of a grounded attack. If you watch Jokic play defense, it's more swiping at the ball when people get the rim. Kobe Bryant did that a lot as well. Obviously, he's 6'6", so it makes more sense. You're not going to try to challenge everything vertically. But those type of small little details, I do think, started to chip away his defensive value and didn't make him as elite as he
I
once
want to
was.
ask you this question, and you know, I'm about to ask you this question. You know, I'm not the one who believes this, but
Mm-hmm.
there are people who Mars will make this argument and be like, Kobe had to do so much on offense in those years that you mentioned that he couldn't be the same level defender. But like, let's say in the fourth quarter, it's 89-89, and you have to stick Kobe on your best defender. Then he's gonna give you that value. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, people will say he was still the same level defender he was. He just didn't show it as much. What would be your rebuttal to that?
Um, I understand where it comes from. Obviously, in the biggest moments, you want your players to be able to do their most valuable work, and Kobe Bryant was someone who could do that a lot. So I understand where it comes from. But for me, from a value standpoint, the last 4 minutes doesn't trump the first 44. So if I see you for the first 44 minutes of a game being a mediocre or a slight positive defensively in terms of your rotations, in terms of your closeouts, in terms of your awareness, and then the last 4 minutes you provide me with some all defensive level defense. You don't get blown by your screen navigation, your ability to move your feet, your strong hands. That doesn't automatically make you an elite defender based on 4 minutes every 2 weeks, because how often are you in a close game? And then in the playoffs, maybe 3 games a series with some finals runs. That's what, 3 games, 4 series.
Yeah.
Maybe 12 games in the playoffs where
Mhm.
you provide me with 12, 5 minutes in the clutch, 12 times 5, 60 minutes of elite defense in the playoffs. That's not enough for me to say you were an elite defense all those years. So for me, I understand where it comes from. But for me, when I look at your value in totality, and it comes from looking at seasonal value opposed to value in singular moments, that's what holds Kobe back for me defensively as his career did decide to extend. And that's not a knock to Kobe Bryant. Most people don't sustain a high elite level defense for over 6-7 years anyway. Most people don't do that. So this isn't Kobe being an anomaly defensively. This is Kobe Bryant being right in line with most of the elite level offensive players of all time. So this is not me trying to disrespect Kobe Bryant, but that is a part of the reason why I slightly favored Tim Duncan over him, because I think his defense traveled more than I think Kobe Bryant's game did. But I do want to say Kobe Bryant's ability to play without the basketball is something that no one seems to talk about. Kobe Bryant without the basketball, his ability to come off screens, his ability to attack closeouts, his ability to play with that 1-2 dribble pull up, all those type of things provide so much value on other teams where you can have a lead playmaker like a Chris Paul if that trade went through. You can have a Steve Nash where if Steve Nash was in his prime, that probably works out a bit better. Like those type of situations, not everyone can fit next to a lead initiator like I believe Kobe Bryant could. And I think that's something that provided him with an extra source of value. But I think I've done the Kobe fans a solid here. I don't think I've
Yeah.
been disrespectful to Kobe Bryant. The Kobe haters, I don't think you hate me either. I think I've been very honest and objective. But
Nah. So I think somebody was just saying that, hey, the players and whatever media voted him all defense. Mars, your opinion doesn't matter, bro.
damn, you're right, man. Shout out to the voters. Shout out to the voters. They do know more than me, man. Shout out to the voters. Before we move on to our number 4, 3, 2, and 1, a few more super chats. Whale with the super chat. D-Rob had a nerve injury in O2. Duncan gave Shaq his biggest playoff drop, 21 points on 49% true shooting for the series. Best defense versus a top 10 player at their peak. What do you remember from that O2 San Antonio Lakers series? And how much do you hold Tim Duncan's ability to probably be the only person who could guard Shaq well? how much does that weigh into your evaluation of
I'll
him?
be honest with you, I don't remember a lot, though I do remember one game. Duncan was absolutely stifling him one game. I do remember that. I can't remember which game it was. So I'm not that accurate, unfortunately, in that series. But thanks to you, I was already planning on doing a Duncan and D-Rob film session throughout this entire summer to get myself more acclimated to judging them as players. But we talked about that. That's one of the best things why Duncan's defense gets raved the way it does, and why I'm not gonna attack somebody if they think Duncan was a better defender than KG, because I understand the argument. The argument can be simple that Duncan's defense for his era mattered more than KG's. Like his ability to actually be able to, like what you just said, stop and be able to, like, even if you don't want to give all the credit to Duncan, he's obviously the main guy that was on Shaq. For him to average 21 points on 49 true shooting, like against Shaq of that time, like we're talking about Shaq who was easily giving you 33 plus points on 65 plus true shooting. Like that's the Shaq we're talking about. So him being able to do that, is you have to give him that credit. And that's why if you think Duncan was the best defender of that era for the reason I just said, I'm not arguing with you, because I think that's a very, very strong argument. I think it really is. I don't know if you think that, Mars, but when somebody first brought that up to me, like I legitimately was just sitting on my bed looking at the ceiling and being like, that's a very good argument. I can't lie to you. That's a really good argument. It's a really good one.
I agree. I do think it's a very strong argument when you look at the value that Tim Duncan brought. Maybe there's a bit of a bias towards Kevin Garnett's era portability with how well
Yeah.
his game translates to the modern game, and that maybe causes him to be looked upon more favorably. So I do agree it's a very valid argument. What I remember of that series is, as a whole, that series was extremely defensive.
Mhm.
I don't want to say something and be completely wrong, but I don't
Yeah.
think anyone scored over 100 points in that series. So it was an extremely strong defensive series. I remember game one. I
Mhm.
think Tim Duncan was like 10 for 30 or something from the field, and Shaq was like 10 for 24 or something. Like it was just an extremely strong defensive series. I still do think the San Antonio Spurs bigs just provided a lot of value in that series outside of just Tim Duncan. I do want to like say, even in that series, guys like David Robinson were still strong defenders. Malik Rose coming off the bench was a strong defender in that
Yeah.
series. So like it wasn't just Tim Duncan. So I do have to say I would
Yeah.
it depends how much credit you want to give. I think if you look at Tim Duncan more favorably, you'd give him the large bulk of the credit. If you look at him more pessimistically, you'd look at the pieces around him and say it's not just Tim Duncan.
Mhm.
So I do see where both sides of the argument come from. But if anyone loves defense besides like the Pistons and the Pacers in '04 or
You should watch
'05,
that series.
that Lakers 0-2 versus
I
San
do want to
Antonio
bring up
series.
Duncan's stats because they are kind of ridiculous. 29 points, 17 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 3 blocks. That's crazy. Like, that is pretty crazy averages. It was a 5-game series, but you got to give credit, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, I didn't know he was averaging that much. I'm not gonna lie. I know Shaq was at -1 efficiency in that series because the Spurs defense was just so strong. 49% true shooting wasn't terrible. So that shows how strong their defense was in the regular season. So now we're into our top four. These are I'm pretty sure you can figure out who hasn't made the list yet. So you guys can figure out who the top four is. We're gonna go with my number four to start things off. We're gonna go with Hakeem Olajuwon. I went with Hakeem Olajuwon at number four. And the reason why I think you would know who I have at number three.
Yeah, we would know. Yep.
I think chat knows who I have at number three. The reason why I favored the other guy over Hakeem is simply because of Hakeem's offensive game early on in his career. His lack of strong playmaking from the moment he entered the league up until Rudy Tomjanovich joined Houston and became the coach over there is something that I do think held back the Houston Rockets offense. Now, I don't think it's entirely on him.
Yeah.
I want to put that out there. I don't think that Hakeem's lack of playmaking was entirely on him. I do think that Don Chaney, the Houston coach at the time prior to Rudy Tomjanovich, was a part of a problem for that. But Hakeem, by his own admission, has said that he didn't really trust his teammates early on. I do think
Yeah,
that.
and you got to tax him for not being that willing of a passer because that was his weakest part of his offensive game was his passing ability and
100%.
playmaking, especially early on until like 93 or 94 when they added more spacing. Then, that kick out game opened up and now he became a better playmaker. But yeah, like Hakeem admitted it, so you can't fight the actual player saying it at that point.
Yeah, that's my biggest hesitation. Not hesitation, but my biggest issue with Hakeem is the fact that his playmaking, I don't want to say was a large detriment to his team, but I do think that hurt his team's offense in the playoffs because he was such a strong isolation scorer, but his lack of willingness to capitalize on the gravity he drew compared to the guy at number 3, who I don't think had those issues, especially once you entered his prime, is the reason why I favored the other guy over Hakeem. But we have to talk about Hakeem's defense, the best defender of this modern era, of the post 3-point line era. His ability to protect the rim as a primary defender, as a help defender, his ability to understand the legal defense and bend those rules to his advantage like crazy, his ability to play in the pick and roll, drop, hedge, switch, even surprisingly, Hakeem Olajuwon could switch.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to bring up individual plays, but his block on John Starks against the Knicks, one of the biggest blocks in NBA history. So, like, his ability to do so many things defensively is what got him this high. Him being one of the best defenders for over a decade, him being one of the most resilient scorers for 7 to 9 years. All those things is what got him into the number 4 spot. But the reason why I can't have him into the top 3 is because of his playmaking holes, which I don't think anyone in the top 3 had. So I want to ask you, because you actually did have Hakeem at number 3. Is it because of the defense, or did you not value the playmaking deficiencies as highly as I did?
I didn't value it that highly, and I think I'm taking Hakeem's longevity over the other guy because by like '06, the other guy was, done for. I feel both of them started off their careers really great. I just value what Hakeem did from 84, 85 all the way to 96, 97. I do value that just a bit more than the other guy, but I think you hit it nail in the head. And I do think the thing about Hakeem that I wanted to bring up because he's another guy that we talked about Kobe's polarizing rankings. I think he's another guy because I just noticed some guys saying, "Oh, Hakeem's this high," and I don't think you're wrong for saying that because a lot of people do that. I feel like we have Hakeem like top 4, and then some people don't even consider Hakeem
Yeah,
to be top 10. It's
you ask
crazy
some
how
people,
his
Hakeem's the
just
one who is the first to be removed from the top 10 when like Steph Curry wins a championship.
yeah. You remember
Hakeem's
those
the one who
discussions?
comes out. It's like, for me, I think it's crazy to have Hakeem at 11 or 12 when you look at Hakeem from an impact standpoint and when you look at his game. But when you obviously start factoring in the accolades and he only has 2 rings, it starts to make sense. But I think it's disingenuous to how good Hakeem was at basketball to say he's out the top 10 completely, in my opinion. And I think you would agree, considering you have him at number 3.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you, defensively, we just spoke about Tim Duncan. What makes it for you that you favor Hakeem's defense? I don't want to say comfortably, but we both said pretty comfortably that Hakeem's the
Yeah.
best defender of the modern era. What is it about Hakeem that makes you able to say that?
One of the things was him not having good supporting casts. And unlike a guy that we were just raving about in KG, he was still able to make them competent, but they weren't like how Hakeem did it. Hakeem was literally taking lackluster defensive personnel and having them like best in the league. Like I think it was 89 or 90, one of those years. He had that team be the best defensive team in the NBA. And that's pretty crazy if you go back and look at the help he had. Like he was one of the best defensive floor raisers we've ever seen, Mars. It's ridiculous how he was able to just floor raise a lot of those guys. And that was just because of how good he was as a rim protector. Like he legit was the guy that put a lid on the rim. I always talk about that, but he legit put a lid on the rim. And that's just because of his length, how well he moved defensively. Because unlike the other guy, his mobility was just a bit more fluid. Hakeem would just he just looked more. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to find a word that matches Hakeem, but because of that footwork, that he developed. I don't know where he developed in his
He
early
was
years.
more. He was more. I don't want to say light on his feet, but he
Yeah,
moved
that's
more.
the word that I'm looking for. Like,
He
so he was
moved more elegantly. He was more
yes, I
more
think it's elegant.
graceful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he was more
he was more
graceful how
graceful.
he moved on the court. So that's why I do think what separates him between all the other defenders post merger, because post merger, I think Bill Russell was easily number one. But
Shout
we're
out to
doing
Bill.
post, yeah.
Shout
Shout
out
out Bill. But if we're doing, post 3-point line, I think Hakeem's the best defender we've ever seen. If you go back and watch, I think it's pretty easily anybody. If you actually turn on the tape, it's like, yeah, that guy's the best defender we've ever seen, bro. And I think there's a gap. I actually think there's a gap between him and 2.
And I wouldn't argue with you, but I'm gonna talk about my number 3 or number 4. You
Yeah.
spoke about
Yeah,
why
he
you had him
played
at number
soccer.
4.
Yeah, he played soccer, football. That's probably one of the reasons why his footwork was that good in his early years.
Yeah, that would make sense. I mean,
Yeah.
as an excellent footy player myself, I
As a
mean,
footy guy over
yeah,
here.
you guys might want to see me on the post. I'm just saying.
Oh Lord.
But back to serious face. There we go. I want to talk about Shaquille O'Neal. I have him at number 3. You have him at number 4. You spoke about his longevity. I actually disagree. I think Shaq's longevity was more valuable than
Mhm.
Hakeem's, in my opinion. I think from the moment he entered the league, he was a top 7-ish player in 92. I think he was that level of player all the way up until around 05. So that's already 13 years. 06, I think it was a very strong year for him. People tend to say he got carried by D Wade, mainly because they look at the finals where he averaged like 13 points. But if you look at the actual season and the 3 rounds preceding that, he was still a very strong player at that time. And in the finals, the reason why he averaged less points is simply because he couldn't make free throws. Don't ask me what was going on, but the free throws were abysmal. But similar to how we spoke about, similar how I posed that question about Steph Curry and his threat to score versus actual ability to shoot, Shaq was being guarded as if he was still the most dominant player in the NBA, even in 06. You got him the ball in the post, the double
I was gonna
team
say, I was gonna bring that up. You gotta bring that up in 06, because as much credit I give Dwayne Wade for that run, like Shaq was still demanding a lot of attention against those Mavs teams, and I think that matters. That matters.
Like D Wade was probably the best player in the NBA at that point at attacking closeouts and attacking a rotating defense, and that tended to happen because Shaq, when he got the ball in the post, was forcing these defenses to collapse and be in a state of rotation. And that was where D Wade was able to run rampant, get to the rim, draw fouls, operate in the mid-range with a bit more space. That's because of things like Shaq. And that's why when you just look at the box score and see he averaged 13 points, you might be like, oh, well, Shaq wasn't that great. Where I think his impact in that series was extremely felt. And I think that's a big reason why they won. And then even in the other series where he was actually a strong scorer, you can still see those things and why he was maybe still a top 10 player even in 06. But I want to talk about prime Shaquille O'Neal.
Which years do you think consider prime Shaq?
I think you got to look at 99 to 02 as prime Shaq. 03 was dented by the foot injuries, and Kobe Bryant went crazy, and Shaq was.
We know what happened in 04 too.
Yeah. So those years, Shaq was probably the biggest individual mismatch of an offensive player we've ever seen. In terms of not only roster construction for other teams having to just have bigs who could just buy fouls, especially like Western Conference teams would just have bigs that would just have to be there just to buy fouls because you can't guard Shaq with just 2 bigs because they will foul out of the game. But then also just the fact that he was so physically imposing but so active. His activity to me is what was so valuable for him. So any big can just park themselves on the block and just wait for an entry pass to come to them. But Shaq's ability to, if he was getting fronted in the post, he could spin off. If the ball was getting switched from one side of the court to the other, he wouldn't just wait on one block and just wait. He would go switch his position, get to the other block, make sure he demands the ball. His ability to dig down and make sure that he gets as deep as he can and as close to the rim as possible. He knew he wasn't a threat to 15 feet. So you know what he did? He made sure he buried his opponent to 12 feet. So he knew he was a threat from everywhere within that range. Those type of things that don't show up on the box score, don't show up on the stat sheet, but provide so much value and put so much pressure on defenses that Shaq was doing from the moment he entered the league to damn near the moment he left, even when he was a big fat man in Phoenix, shows how much value that I think Shaq was bringing. Now, obviously, the free throws is a huge detriment.
Yeah, you got to mention the free throws and then even the defense.
The defense is what I'm getting to now. Defensively is where Shaq leaves a lot to be desired. As a rim deterrent, one of the strongest of all time, in my opinion. Just no one wanted to challenge Shaq at the rim.
And that probably saved them a lot because because they
Facts.
were fearful of what he potentially could do.
The
They're like,
issue
yeah,
was outside of the paint, he was egregious. And we were getting into an era where guards were starting to become more prevalent with their outside shot and their creation of the pick and roll. And Shaq was not only reluctant to leave the rim, he damn near refused to leave the
he's
paint.
one of those guys that is so weird that is like one possession legit looks like an all-time defender, and then the next possession just gets toured around on defense.
Yeah, Shaq was definitely someone who I think he would have benefited from playing in an era defensively that was less predicated on outside shooting.
Yeah.
Once you had guys who were more comfortable shooting those pull-up jump shots, that's when Shaq's defense really started to get exposed.
The Kings were one of the teams that just were killing them. That's the reason why they were that close, even though you could say the talent gap just from Shaq and Kobe should have cleared them. But they were, Mike Bibby was cooking in Shaq in 02. It was bad.
Even guys like even stretch bigs, like I don't want to call Arvydas Sabonis a stretch big, but
there's another
like
guy, I'm forgetting his name. He played in Memphis that even Shaq said he gave him the most trouble. I'm blanking on his name, but even he was just giving Shaq
could probably help us out with that. But those type of players were such a problem for Shaq, and like you could see it. And the thing that I think hurts him is in playoff series, Shaq, I don't want to say was liable to get into foul trouble, but he would sometimes struggle with leveraging his physicality legally, defensively, and would often get himself in situations where he's stepping out too far, and then he ends up just picking up cheap fouls that he doesn't need to. And there's plenty of games where he can't be as dominant down the stretch because of the fact he already has 4 or 5 fouls. And then you have like guys like Kobe Bryant who are there to save the day because Kobe Bryant is Kobe being Bryant. Yeah. So that's what made that duo so deadly, that Shaq's weaknesses could be hidden by a guy like Kobe Bryant. But like I said, the reason I favor him over Hakeem is not only the longevity, but that singular offensive dominance, while still being a positive defender, in my opinion, based on the rebounding, based on the rim deterrence and the rim protection, despite the fact that he couldn't do anything outside of 12 feet, is what gives me I don't want to say I'm comfortable, but what gives me room to say I'm confident with Shaq at number 3 and Hakeem at number 4. But I assume your hesitance with Shaq would be the defense, right?
Yeah, it is that. But I will admit, even now, I'm like, again, I want people to know I'm one of those guys that I can easily change my opinion on players, even though it does take some convincing, and it will take myself to go back and watch the film. But yeah, I think Shaq at 3 is pretty reasonable, and Hakeem 4 is reasonable.
My opinion isn't set in stone. I don't like when people think that because I think something, it means I can never have my mind changed. I'm always open to new perspectives.
Especially if you're going back and watching more film and you're noticing different things about a player. Like it's like I was going back the other day and watching Steph Curry in 2018. I'm be honest with you, I think Steph probably deserved Finals MVP because I think Steph played better than KD in 3 of those 4 games. But that's a different discussion for another day. But that is a different discussion for another day. But because I was watching that, I was like, Steph is just creating just so many dang shots, and then he's actually shooting pretty like historically too. But he had that
game 3.
He had that game 3 stinker that completely turned it away from him.
But we are at the moment that everyone's been waiting for. Who is the GOAT, number 1 and number 2? We're obviously going to start with number 2, but you will figure out who number 1 is once we get to number 2.
I'm not. The number 2 is going to get it. Yeah.
So I think based on the way this has been going, who we actually have at number 1.
Yeah.
But Dream, you have at number 2 Michael Jordan.
Yes.
Tell me why you have Michael Jordan as the second greatest player.
That's tough because in the peak list, I had Michael Jordan number 1. So before you guys hurry up and just go crazy again, we're talking about the greatest players of all time. And of course, I'm factoring in longevity. I'm factoring in how long you were good for. I'm factoring in your prime and the years you got injured because Jordan, I'm sorry, I'm not just going to give Jordan a pass that in 94, 95, he decided to play baseball. I know for the reasons are valid reasons why he didn't play, but it's, I gotta tax you, unfortunately, because he didn't play. And then the year he came back, we saw what he was doing against Orlando when they smacked him in 6. But that's a different discussion for another day. But Jordan, greatest score we've ever seen. Went over this. Greatest score we've ever seen. One of the quickest first steps we've ever seen. Was an unreal passer, playmaker. Contrary to belief as well. He's another guy just like Kobe. But the difference with Kobe, he was actually more willing as a passer, which separated them, and it's why Jordan was as good as he was. And another thing, we always talk about it, Jordan's perimeter defense. Now, I actually think Jordan's defense is overrated, Mars. Might be crazy to some people. I know I'm seeing your eye.
Hot take.
It's overrated in terms of, again, he's another guy people look at the steals, and I get it. I get the gamble. He gambled, but he gambled a lot in passing lanes, dude. Gambled a lot in passing lanes. That just led to big plays on the other end. It was ridiculous. But I do have to give him credit for being very quick onto the defensive end, being able to move his feet. He was able to navigate screens well. He matched up with wings very well too, and that has to go with him being 6'6" with very good length. But he did overplay a lot in those passing lanes, and it does hurt him. It hurts him because if you're you're getting 2 to 3 steals a game, fair. I'll give it to you, Jordan. But there can be like 3 other plays you gambled and it led to an open layup. You gambled, it led to an open mid-range shot in the corner. You gambled and then it led to another open shot. It's like, Jordan, you did get those 2-3 steals, but bro, you're gambling a little bit too much for my liking. But I do think because of Jordan being just a ridiculous player he was and how great he was at his peak, unfortunately, because of him not having the adequate amount of years, I have this other guy over him. Now it's gonna be up to you, Mars. Who do you have at 2, man?
I know,
because I know you talk about number 1 a lot over there. Narrative Mars does. So
yeah, but this is the hoop talk, Mars. So unfortunately, at number 2, I also went with Michael Jordan. The best player to ever play basketball, in my opinion, is Michael Jordan. But unfortunately, when you look at his career as a rookie, he provided strong value, but he wasn't Michael Jordan we knew and people came to love. But he wasn't a great defender at that point. The gambling was on full effect as a rookie. If you go back and watch Michael Jordan as a rookie, he was jumping at everything that was possible to jump at. He was diving for every single possible passing lane. He was running out of position. His awareness was all over the place. As a scorer, he didn't have much of an outside shot. It was extremely downhill, rim pressure dominant. Like, nothing wrong with that, but that's what he was at that point.
Yeah.
Then the second year, he's obviously hurt, misses most of the season, comes back right in time for the playoffs. Has a very strong series against Boston, but it's only a 3-game sample size. Not much value is being given to me in maybe 20 games over the whole course of a season. Then 87 comes along. He starts to elevate. His playmaking starts to take another level. His defense starts to elevate. He becomes more aware. His outside shot starts to progress, and he becomes more comfortable in the mid-range. And then you get to peak Michael Jordan, where he starts adding the little post game to his arsenal. The mid-range shot becomes more refined. His playmaking elevates to a whole nother level, in my opinion. The first step is still basically as strong as it was as a rookie. Then defensively, he gambled less. He was a better man defender. He was able to play more 1 through 3 consistently. And then for me, defensively, I think the best version of Michael Jordan defensively was actually second 3-peat Jordan.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that is because like you said, he gambled a lot less because he was slower.
Yeah, he was slower. So he's not. It's gonna hurt you more because your athleticism. Sometimes that one step, you're actually gonna get the ball.
Exactly. But, so you start to believe maybe you can go for everything because you're capable of it. But as he got slower, I think he got smarter. I think as he got stronger in those second 3-peat years with the added weight he put on, he was able to guard the post more effectively. I still think he was extremely smart. I think his hands were always extremely strong, but I think his ability to just not be responsible for many breakdowns at that point is what made him a better defender, in my opinion, at that point. Those Bulls defense was extremely strong as well, so maybe there's a bit of bias when it comes to looking at how good the Bulls defense was and how much credit I'm giving Michael Jordan for that. But there's not much to say about Michael Jordan that hasn't been said.
We said a lot. Yeah, I'm not gonna. We said a
the,
lot
re-
in this
the
peak. We said a
reason
lot
why
here.
he's number 2 is because of the fact that he's missed a couple years because of retirement and
Yeah,
injury,
injury.
and that he retired twice. So even post 98, there was probably an extra few years he could have given us, but he didn't. And I can't hypothesize the years he would have given us. They weren't there. They didn't exist. So that hurt his value. So Dream, I'm gonna go. You can say who your number 1 is.
I have LeBron Ramon James as my greatest player of all time. Again, I want to make this clear because I want people to understand. We did a peak and greatest. Me and Mars explained the difference, but I'm going to again in case if you missed it. Peak list is when we're gauging you at your best, and we did a 3-year sample. I think Jordan at his best is the best player I've ever seen play. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see him live, but he's the best player I've ever seen. But LeBron James gets the title of the greatest to me, and it's more than just accolades. It's his sustained prime and how long that was, and just his overall longevity, which I think is the other than Kareem, you could argue over Kareem at this point, has the greatest longevity in NBA history, and he still had the second greatest peak to me in NBA history. So LeBron Ramon James, and I want you to talk about his game, but LeBron Ramon James, one of the greatest playmakers we've ever seen, great scorer. At his peak was a very good defender. Of course, some of that value did fell off in the second stint in Cleveland. But I do want to give credit to one of my friends in the Discord. They wanted me to talk about this, about '09 LeBron James. Because unfortunately, if that LeBron James would have won a championship, we might be having some different discussions about him as well, because that was a ridiculous playoff run. If you go back and watch, unfortunately, he couldn't beat Dwight Howard.
Hey,
But Dwight Howard was really good. But Dwight
Dwight.
Howard was really, really good back then. So,
So your number 1 is LeBron James. My number 1 is in fact Jalen Green, the greatest. No, I'm joking. My number 1 is also LeBron James. For reasons you've outlined, we do value longevity, not over peak, but maybe we value it slightly more than a peak in this regard, and that is why LeBron James ends up at number 1. Obviously his early years when he came in at 18, I don't think he was an elite level player at that point. I think he didn't really become a top 5 level player until maybe 06, 07 ish. So there was a couple years where he was still a strong all-star level player, which still does provide value. But in this context, when you're trying to be the greatest player of all time, I'm looking at 06 to 2018 plus 2020 is another year where he provided that level of value. So 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023, and 03, 04, and 04, 05 are years that LeBron James didn't provide that extreme high level value to put him in this GOAT conversation. So I'm not going to say he had 20 years of top 5 level value. I think he has around 15, which is still more than basically everyone on this list. So that is enough for me to get him into this conversation. When you look at 09 LeBron, like you brought up, that might be the most athletic basketball player
I've ever seen. Yeah.
His verticality, his speed, his strength. He was 6'9", 260, running faster than everyone up and down the court. His ability to finish with both hands, his ability to play in transition, but also his playmaking ability. I can't say it's underrated because everyone knows how great he is as a playmaker, but the pressure he puts on defense getting downhill, and then the pressure he put on defenses as he became more of a post player in 2012 and managed to extend his career by strengthening his outside jump shot, is another testament to his adaptability, which is something I've spoken about with a few other players. So for me, LeBron James does come out on top in this conversation. Now, I understand everyone who values peak over longevity, who would have Michael Jordan as the GOAT. That's a very valid case. I'm not going to argue with someone who values that. I understand the people who value the accomplishments, doing more in less time, as they like to call it. And
it is the doing more or less time, but hey.
And saying that's why Michael Jordan's the GOAT. Now, like I've said before, I try to remove as many outside factors to a single player's impact as I can, which is why I tend to remove the team success away from the individual as much as possible, which is why I don't really look at the championships and stuff, because that goes down to roster construction, coaching, and many other things. But for someone who does value those things very highly, it does make sense to have Michael Jordan number 1. Me having LeBron James at number 1 does not mean it's crazy to have Michael Jordan number 1. And obviously, this is only post 3-point line. So Kareem
this is post
3-point
line. Yeah,
Bill Russell
Kareem,
didn't
Bill
make
Russell,
it.
Will Chamberlain, they don't make it.
None of those guys made it. So maybe one day we'll do a show about some of the players post pre 3-point
Pre
line.
3-point line.
We'll see. But I just want to, before we leave you and I get through these last super chats, I want to show you guys Dream's list and my list, just so you guys can see what we're working with, because I don't want you guys to just be having to remember what we went through. So I'm going to start with Dream's 11 to number 1 first, and then we'll get to mine.
So we got the screen.
There we go.
Yes, sir.
So Dream went with 11 Kevin Garnett, 10 Kevin Durant, 9 Magic Johnson, 8 Larry Bird, 7 Stephen Curry, 6 Tim Duncan, 5 Kobe Bryant, 4 Shaquille O'Neal, 2 Hakeem, 2 Jordan, 1 LeBron.
Yeah.
My fault. And then I went, you can see, this is the whole thinking that I went back with my list. You can see some of the honorable mentions, people who didn't make it. I went with...
Yeah, you gotta have to make it fancy too, Mars.
Yeah. So I do. I'm a little show off. So I went with... There were some players who I felt needed honorable mention, some players who I didn't give an honorable mention, but they're on this list for you to see. So I went with Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, Clyde Drexler, John Stockton, Reggie Miller, Isaiah Thomas, Jason Kidd, and Moses Malone as the people who didn't make the cut. And then 2019, we went through at the start of the episode. So 11, I went with Kevin Durant, 10, Kevin Garnett, 9, Stephen Curry, 8, Magic Johnson, 7, Larry Bird, 6, Kobe Bryant, 5, Tim Duncan, 4, Hakeem Olajuwon, 3, Shaquille O'Neal, 2, Michael Jordan, and 1, LeBron James. That's who I went with. And now, before we leave you guys for another week, let me get through these last super chats. Cruiser Nation said, "My dog Mars, appreciate you, Cruiser. I appreciate you when you come up on Open Gym. Thank you for tapping in." Matthew said, "Estimate how long this will be. He needs to sleep. He is sending it in pounds, so I know he's in the UK." I appreciate you, Matthew, for staying up as long as you did. If you're still here, I appreciate you for tapping in. Alan with "Where is Bill Russell? 11 rings, disrespecting."
We just explained it now. This is just post 3-point line, so unfortunately we can't. We're not disrespecting them. It's just just to make the list easier for other people to understand. That's it.
But shout out to Alan, always showing love. Pimp named Slickback. Fellas not having Stockton and AI in the top 10 is crazy.
He's trolling. That's true.
I'm not gonna act like they were close to making the top 10 because they weren't. But I appreciate you for tapping in. Blue Marvel, we are talking gambling talk. Love to hear it. Shout out to Michael Jordan and his gambling on and off the court. Shout out to Michael Jordan.
Yes, sir.
Pimp name Slipback again. Why is Mars lying? It's clearly Jalen Green.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, it is Jalen Green. Vincent P with the 2.00. No idea what that means, but I appreciate you, Vincent. And Duke with the $1 super chat. I appreciate you. And Gabe saying Google Sheets is better than Google Docs. I will be on Google Docs, but I appreciate everyone who stayed through the whole show. I appreciate everyone who tapped in. I appreciate everyone who watches after the fact. We have gone through our 2 parts of the top 20 greatest players of all time. If you missed part 1, I implore you to go back and watch it so you can see what we said about which players and why they were where they were. Next week, we will do something different. I don't know what we will do yet, so it will be a surprise for you guys.
It's gonna be a surprise for me too, so we'll see, man.
Dream, do you have any final words before we get up out?
Final words. I know Gabe's in the chat. It was good being a Heat fan. So next week, I know I will not be wearing this Heat hat anymore. I wear it the last 2 episodes. It looks like this will be the last time I wear it. This is obviously not a jinx. It is not a jinx.
Yeah, my final words. Thank you for everyone who tapped in. Thank you everyone who stayed and watched, because I know Players Choice is actually live right now. So thank you for everyone who stayed and watched. I appreciate
Who's live?
You guys.
Who's the one live?
It's Ticket vs the World. I believe.
Ticket.
So thank you for everyone who stayed. We will see you next week. Next weekend, I can't give you a guaranteed day. Next weekend,
either Saturday or Sunday,
with a new topic, with real hoop talk that I know you guys seem to be enjoying. And just make sure you stay tuned. So thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you